The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Mee Moa, and I am the President and Executive Director of Asian Americans Advancing Justice, AAJC. We are a national civil rights organization based in Washington, D.C., working to empower Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders to participate in our democracy. Advancing Justice AAJC is also part of a national affiliation that includes Advancing Justice Asian Law Caucus in San Francisco, Advancing Justice Chicago, Advancing Justice Los Angeles, and Advancing Justice Atlanta. I want to thank all of you for joining us on the call as we release the findings of a nationwide poll of over 1,300 registered Asian American voters. During today's call, we will talk about the untapped political potential of the Asian American vote, how they politically identify themselves, and what their key issues are as they head to the polls this November. We will also talk about the community's attitudes towards government and ask why, in the light of this growing ascendant community, aren't the political parties and candidates doing more to engage the Asian American voters? Advancing Justice AAJC is proud to partner with APIAVote to conduct this pre-election survey on Asian American voter attitudes. This work builds upon our prior polling work that our two organizations have done together in the 2012 election. Christine Chen, who is the Executive Director of APIAVote, is also on the call, and you will hear from her later during this presentation. AAPI Data was commissioned to design the survey, conduct the poll, and compile the analysis. And Dr. Karthik Ramakrishnan, who is the AAPI Data Director, is also on this call to discuss the survey's methodology and present the findings. On this call, we will also be joined by Rosita Lee, the Chair of APIAVote Nevada and Apala Nevada Chapter President. We will also be joined by Jeannie Nguyen, President of Voice of Vietnamese Americans, located right here in our neighborhood, Fairfax, Virginia, and Teresa Tran, who is the Executive Director of APIAVote Michigan. These community members are active with registering voters and civic engagement in the Asian American community, and they will talk about how they will use the findings of this poll to help them in their work. Since the 1980s, the Asian American population has nearly tripled. By 2060, it is projected that 1 out of every 10 Americans will be Asian American. The community is growing outside of the traditional gateway cities and states on the East and West Coast. And in fact, the growth is taking place in significantly in places like the South and in the Midwest. And in the last decade, the Asian American electorate has nearly doubled from more than 2 million to 3.9 million. But despite this growth, there has not been any attention paid to the Asian American vote. In fact, we believe that there are at least 60 congressional races across the country where the Asian American citizen voting age population constitute 8% or more of the total population and could significantly impact the outcome of these races. That's precisely why Advancing Justice AAJC and APIAVote were so interested in surveying Asian American registered voters on their political affiliations, thoughts on the issues, and attitudes towards government, because no one else has, despite this enormous untapped potential. So this is the only national survey of its kind. I'm pleased to hand it off to Dr. Karthik Ramakrishnan, Director of AAPI Data, who we commissioned to design the survey and analyze the results. He will present those, briefly present those results today.
Thank you, Mee, and hopefully you all can hear me okay. I'm talking via the web network for this webinar. Christine, please let me know if there are any problems on the audio end. Thank you, Mee, and it's exciting to be part of this project. One thing I should note, what you'll see at the bottom of your screen are a set of Twitter handles that represent the organizations that are the leads on this survey. APIAVote and AAJC are the organizations that are sponsoring this report, and we did the research to help them out. So you can tweet at any of those. We also encourage you to tweet at the hashtag AAPI Voices if you have any questions or thoughts. Just to summarize what we have in our survey report, the top issues that Asian American voters care about are national security, jobs in the economy, gun control, and health care. Gun control is something that for the first time we have asked questions on, and it turns out that this is an important issue for Asian American voters. We also find that Asian American voters are still very much up for grabs in terms of their party identification. This is because the vast majority of Asian Americans are first-generation immigrants and have not had the kind of political experience in their childhood that native-born individuals do. The largest group that we find are those who declare themselves independent or don't know. Among partisans, Democrats have a 2-to-1 advantage. And the results that we find today are similar to 2012, but we do see indications of a stronger move towards the Democratic Party among Asian American women. On the issues, the Democrats have an advantage on most issues. We'll go over this in a little bit. But the Republicans have an advantage on national security. Another important set of findings we have related to whether or not people are being contacted, and we find that they are not for the most part. And in fact, contact rates in August and September of 2014 are lower than they were in May 2012, which was 6 months prior to the general election. Overall, voter enthusiasm is about the same as before. Women are less enthusiastic than men, and we find that Vietnamese Americans and Republicans are more enthusiastic. Overall, we find a Democratic advantage in the House vote, although the parties are more evenly matched when it comes to Chinese Americans. And among Republicans, for the House vote, we find a Republican advantage in their intention to vote. Finally, we'll say something about the importance of ethnic media, and then I'll turn it to Christine Chen. The methodology, this is a survey of over 1,300 registered voters, and we conducted it between middle of August and middle of September 2014. We have the overall margin of error there, as well as the margin of error per group, and you can find this in the appendix of the survey report that you can find on APIAVote.org, as well as Advancing Equality, which is AAJC's website. The data are weighted by ethnicity and gender, ethnicity by state of residence, ethnicity by education, and ethnicity by nativity. So there's a pretty sophisticated weighting algorithm that we have that tries as much as possible to make the data representative of the population. In terms of background, I'm not going to stick on this point too much because Mee has said quite a bit in terms of the growth of the Asian American electorate. It's also important to note the growth in community infrastructure when it comes to voter registration. On National Voter Registration Day in 2012, there were 154 organizations that serve API communities that participated in that effort. This year, it's more than double, 317. So it's a good sign that there should be more involvement of Asian Americans in the electoral process in 2014 than in the prior midterm election. In terms of the mood of the Asian American electorate, we find that overall, people think of the economy as doing just fair. This is in line with national data, even though the questions are not directly comparable. When people are asked about the economic direction of the country, we find a similar level of opinion. When it comes to presidential job approval, we find that 50% of Asian American voters approve of Barack Obama's job as president. And as you'll see, there's a significant variation across national origin groups. Asian Indians and Japanese tend to get the highest approval ratings, whereas Vietnamese tend to get the lowest. We don't find significant differences by gender or nativity. One thing I should also note is that Obama's job approval among Asian Americans is higher than the national average, with recent surveys pegging it in the low 40%. We also asked about favorability of President Obama, but in the interest of time, I'll just talk about the favorability of the Republican Party and the Democratic Party. We find that the Republican Party, there's about split opinion in terms of favorable versus unfavorable. And again, there's variation across groups. Almost a flip pattern of what you saw on Obama job approval lowest ratings among Asian Indians and Japanese Americans, and then highest net ratings among Vietnamese Americans. But you also see positive ratings among Korean Americans. When it comes to Democratic favorability, first thing you'll notice is that the overall favorability rating for Democrats is higher than it is for Republicans. But you still have about 29% that say unfavorable, and there's variation again across groups, with Vietnamese Americans showing the lowest favorability and Indian Americans showing the highest favorability. There's also gender differences that you'll see here. Women are more favorable on the Democratic Party than men, and the nativity differences are not statistically significant. Say a little bit about voter interest and vote intention. So voters are about as enthusiastic as they were in prior elections. So the dominant finding is that 40% say that they have the same level of enthusiasm as before, and about evenly split between those who are more enthusiastic versus less enthusiastic. There is variation across groups. So Chinese Americans are the ones least likely to say that they're more enthusiastic this time around. And the Vietnamese American population are the ones who are most likely to have people that are at 40% versus 12% in terms of the more enthusiastic versus less enthusiastic. So they're the least divided when it comes to their level of enthusiasm. Men are slightly more likely to be enthusiastic than women, whether you look at the more enthusiastic figure or the less enthusiastic figure. There's no significant pattern by age, and we find that Republicans are more enthusiastic than Democrats, which is a finding that you'll find here. We also estimate likely turnout among registered voters, and you'll see this shortly in an updated version of the report that will be uploaded on both the APIAVote and Asian Americans Advancing Justice AAJC site. We asked people if they're planning to vote, and then there was a subsequent question about whether they're absolutely certain that they'll vote, fairly certain, or not too certain. And what we find is that 60% of registered voters say that they're absolutely certain that they'll vote. And this is in line with what we have seen in prior midterm election years. But we also find the potential for an increase this year, depending on what kind of outreach and mobilization will occur by political parties, candidates and campaigns, and nonprofit organizations. So if you look at the people that are fairly certain, that number increases to 77%. So that gives the range of where we see turnout happening in 2014. One thing I should also note is that the Asian American population continues to grow. So chances are very high that we'll have over 100,000 and maybe even over 200,000 new voters in 2014 as opposed to 2010 because of the growth of the baseline electorate. In terms of how people intend to vote, we find a fair number of Asian Americans who are undecided, and this is something that we find consistently across surveys of Asian Americans over the last several years. They are the quintessential swing voter. A lot of them have not made up their minds and will make up their minds before Election Day. Among those who have made up their minds, the Democratic Party has a net advantage, and this net advantage is strongest among Asian Indians and Japanese Americans, and the Republicans have a net advantage among Vietnamese Americans. The net advantage of Democrats is also stronger among women than among men. It is stronger among younger age groups, and it is stronger among the U.S.-born versus the foreign-born. That said, for most of these categories, you'll see that among those who have decided, the Democratic Party has an advantage, but there's still a big chunk of people who are undecided. In terms of issue priorities, what we'll present are the issues that people said were extremely important, and here are the top 4 issues that came in as extremely important. And the differences here are not statistically significant. And so that's important to note because things like national security and gun control are things that we haven't seen typically in the past. National security makes sense given the various international threats that the U.S. is facing and our engagement abroad. gun control is something that we have not polled on before, and that ends up as being an extremely important issue. Where the parties, where the voters think of one party versus the other having an advantage on the issues, we find that the Democratic Party is generally seen as having more of an advantage. This is in keeping with the party orientation split that we saw earlier, but there is variation across issues. On healthcare and standing up for the middle class and treating Americans fairly and equally, we find that the Democratic Party is having the strongest advantage. The advantage is weaker on something like immigration, although they still see the Democratic Party is better positioned on that. And there's no statistically significant difference on taxes. And then finally, when it comes to national security, they see the Republican Party is holding the upper hand on that issue. In terms of partisanship, this graph will look similar to what you had seen before, but just to remind you, that was the intention to vote in 2014 for the House candidate. Here's party identification in general. And again, we find that the largest group are those who do not identify with either party. And among those who do identify, Democrats have an advantage. And again, the pattern varies by nationality. Indians and Japanese Americans have the strongest net Democratic identification. Vietnamese are essentially split. There are important gender differences as well. And as I mentioned before, the Democrat-Republican split among women is greater now than it was in 2012. For other groups, the patterns look virtually the same between 2012 and 2014. In terms of voter contact, the major finding is that voters are mostly not being contacted. So we asked about whether they were being contacted by Democrats, Republicans, and community organizations. And we find that depending on the group that is trying to do the contact, anywhere from 2/3 to 3/4 are not being contacted. One area that is significant to note is that community organizations are on par with contact by Republican parties and candidates, and this is a testament to the increase in capacity and effort by community organizations. In the past, we've seen that contact by community organizations typically lags behind those of parties and campaigns because parties and campaigns have a lot of resources at their disposal. And we have the findings below comparison to the Lake Research Survey from May 2012, where you'll see that contact by Democrats and Republicans is lower today than it was 6 months prior to the general election in 2012. There's variation in contact across groups, and then later on in the Q&A, I'm happy to go more into that. Some groups are getting more contacted than others. Japanese Americans and Korean Americans, for example, are more likely to get significant contact. No significant gender differences. Age also matters, as well as nativity. The foreign-born are less likely to be contacted, and a lot of that has to do with lack of outreach to ethnic media and also lack of in-language outreach, which we'll talk about very shortly. The importance of contact is also evident in 2 other questions in our survey. One is a question that's used in various other surveys like the American National Election Studies, saying that politics is too complicated for me to understand. And the national average is 54% among registered voters. For Asian Americans, it's 67%. So this shows the critical importance of voter education in the Asian American community, and we find variation across communities here as well. Women are more likely to say that politics is too complicated, signaling that a targeted outreach towards women might make a difference in terms of reducing that gap. And again, at the bottom, you see that the foreign-born are much more likely than the U.S.-born Asian American to say that politics is difficult to understand, again, indicating that voter education will make a critical difference. We also have another question which indicates whether or not people agree with the sentiment that politicians don't care about the concerns of people like me. And we find here that the proportion for Asian Americans is similar to the national average, but the levels are very high. And this shows that if parties and campaigns did more outreach, they would present a more friendly and caring face to registered voters who at the present are not hearing from the political parties. Finally, we have some findings on ethnic media, which we show as very important to try to do outreach to the Asian American community. Again, the Asian American community is the one most likely to be first-generation immigrant. They consume news from various sources, television being the most prominent, and then internet and social media, newspaper, radio, friends and family, and community leaders. And here's a breakdown, and you'll see that the pattern is very similar. If you look at consumption of Asian-only media, mainstream media, or both, we find about half consume non-Asian media exclusively, but the other half consume some variation of Asian ethnic media, in this case television, either in combination with mainstream or exclusively. And we find that the highest levels of ethnic media consumption across all these charts, which I'll go through very quickly, are among Chinese Americans and Vietnamese Americans, and then followed by Korean Americans. So that was for television before. This is for internet and social media. And so this is more likely to be mainstream exclusive, but again, if you look at Chinese, Korean, and Vietnamese Americans, pretty high levels of ethnic media consumption on social media and internet. Newspapers is very high in terms of ethnic media consumption among Chinese Americans, Vietnamese Americans, and Korean Americans. And then finally, when it comes to radio, even though this is not used as frequently, we find that radio is also an important arena for ethnic news media, and this is especially true for Vietnamese Americans and Chinese Americans. So to sum up, the top issues are national security, jobs and economy, gun control, and healthcare. Still up for grabs, although there is a Democratic advantage on most issues and among women. There's an overall Democratic advantage in the House vote, except for Vietnamese Americans, where there's a Republican advantage. Overall, voter enthusiasm is on par with prior elections, but this shows a potential room for increased enthusiasm if voters are being contacted. They're not currently being contacted by the parties. Contact can have a big impact, as we show in the survey. And then finally, that contact ideally will happen not only through mainstream channels, but also through ethnic media. I'll leave it at that and turn it over to Christine Chen.
Great, thank you. Good morning, everyone. It's exciting to provide you insight on the Asian American electorate and how we are really essentially looking to engage this base of voters. As you heard, there has been tremendous growth in the community, and what this means is opportunity. Opportunity for the Asian American Pacific Islander community to make a positive impact in these regions through its increased civic engagement, and an opportunity for campaigns and political parties to engage voters who remain mostly undecided. Many are disengaged from politics because the parties and candidates are not directly addressing them. As stated, as many as 64% of those surveyed believe politicians don't care much about what they think, and 67% are disengaged from politics because it's too complicated. So how do we change that and eliminate those barriers and attitudes? Well, APIAVote is a national organization that works with 35 community-based organizations representing 17 states. We are utilizing trusted messengers and organizations to engage specific ethnic communities, and each organization varies in size and structure. Some of them have full-time staff and others are volunteer-run organizations. But we as a collective are looking to change the attitudes and voting behavior of this diverse community with grassroots efforts, engaging 200,000 households this year with direct voter contact. This includes targeted mailers with essential translated materials and 3 rounds of personal phone calls, which allow us to identify voters who need language assistance and rise to the polls on Election Day. This is coupled with candidate forums in Michigan and Virginia. In Oregon and Washington State, our partners are hosting ballot parties, while New York and Oregon are creating translated voter guides. Emerging communities in Phoenix, Arizona, and Charlotte, North Carolina are canvassing local neighborhoods while partnering with their Latino counterparts. By partnering with local ethnic press in Florida, our partners are educating voters on the changing election laws so individuals are not turned away from the polls due to confusing laws. And in Minnesota, our partners are canvassing their local precincts to register new voters since they have the benefit of same-day registration and turning them out to vote. While we do our job, we are asking the parties and campaigns to do their job in contacting this base of undecided voters, and we remind them these votes are up for grabs. By connecting with Asian voters on a consistent basis and addressing and voting on issues that support their values, there is an opportunity to transform that 45% of undecided voters. With only 27 days left until the voters head out to the polls, both political parties have significant opportunities to reach out to Asian American Pacific Islander voters to close the gap. With that, I will turn it over back to me so we can hear directly from our local partners.
Thank you, Christine. And as I mentioned earlier, we have brought onto this conversation a panel of frontline organizers who are deep in the civic engagement work among the API communities. So let me reintroduce again to you. We have Rosita Lee, who is the chair of APIAVote Nevada and APALA Nevada chapter president. We also have Ginny Nguyen, president of the Voice of Vietnamese Americans located in Fairfax, Virginia, and Teresa Tran, the executive director of APIAVote Michigan. Ladies?
Thank you very much. I am Rosita Lee of the APIAVote Nevada and with APALA. You know, I've been working with the Asian Americans, Native Hawaiians, and Pacific Islanders in our community for more than 20 years. In the state of Nevada, Asian Americans make up 7% of the population. We have grown by 116% between 2000 and 2010. In Congressional District 3 of Southern Nevada, Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders make up 11% of the citizen voting age population. You know, because of the publicity about our Asian American population growing considerably, some of the candidates have taken it seriously and have been attending some of our functions. But in general, there's an ignorance of the importance of the Asian American vote. Right now, we have a close U.S. House race between Republican Joe Heck and Democrat Aaron Bilbray. Both of these candidates, I feel, have not reached out to the Asian community in a meaningful way. They haven't hired Asian Americans on their campaigns. They don't reach out to ethnic press and barely attend our events. I haven't seen any of their campaign materials translated into any ethnic language. Because of this, Asian Americans in Nevada don't even know who these candidates are or what they stand for. This makes organizing to get out the vote more difficult because why would Asian Americans want to register to vote when they don't feel these candidates even care about them? Still, we are trying to get Asian Americans to register to vote and participate in our democracy. We have been going out to register people to vote at places like Seafood City. Now, this is a Filipino mini mall with a market, restaurants, bakery, banks, and retail shops, as well as beauty salon. This is a central point where thousands of Filipinos and some other ethnic groups meet. We have also gone to high schools to register 18-year-olds. We have gone to UNLV. We went to CSN. And we went to Chinatown markets and restaurants to register people. With APIAVote, we are sending out mailers in Tagalog, Chinese, and English to about 12,000 or more potential voters. We have been working since April to get the candidates to reach out to our community and get an Asian on their campaign staff to no avail. Since they refuse to make us a priority, the best way to demonstrate our impact is to show up at the polls and vote.
Thank you, Rosita. And now
Welcome.
we have Ginny Nguyen.
Good morning. I am Ginny Nguyen, President and CEO of Voice of Vietnamese Americans based in Virginia. We also coalesce with the Vietnamese Americans in California, Texas, and Washington states. I've been working as a leader in the Asian American and Native Hawaiian and Pacific Islanders community in Virginia for 8 years since 2006. In the state of Virginia, Asian Americans make up about 7% of the populations, but we have areas such as Fairfax where we come up to about 17 or 18% of the populations. We have grown by 71% between 2000 and 2010. In Congressional District 10, Asian Americans make up 10.2% of the citizen voting age populations. This is one of the fourth most important race in the whole nation. And we noticed that in the race, we do have the Democratic candidates, John Faust, and Republican candidates, Barbara Comstock, reaching out to the populations, but not adequately. They came and show up at some events, but there has been no ads on the in language, either in the media, in the newspapers, or on televisions, and the people still feel that they have not been reached by these candidates. It's most importantly that we also know that in Virginia, we do have independent candidates that reaching out more into the grassroots at many different levels. So the race is very close, and the candidates have made some attempts reaching out to the Asian American community, recognizing the need for this voting bloc to swing their way. That has been nice to see, but have not truly invested in the community. It's been at a superficial level, attending an event here and there, as I have said. They have not reached out to the community in language. They have not spent money to reach Asian Americans through ethnic media. They would reach out to the people better if they put some money into printed media that would last and be something we can read later on and circulate among friends and families. We do quite a bit to organize and engage voters in Virginia. We have a radio broadcasting show in which we've been talking about the elections, the new voter ID laws, the absentee voting, the early voting. The show reaches about 15,000 people in Virginia every time. We work with Fairfax County to translate voting materials into Vietnamese. We also have online voter registrations on our website that we often send students to sign up online. We are also trying to register voters as small businesses, encouraging them to do absentee voting because their working hours are like from 6 a.m. to 9 p.m. We've registered about 1,000 voters for the midterms. These are new voters and new citizens who we recently helped naturalize. We will be reaching out to about 18,000 people in the state with mailers and phone calls. We cannot guarantee who all will turn out, but even if it is 5,000, we would have made a huge difference in these elections. As you have attended the survey, you know that Vietnamese Americans are the most unreached populations in the Asian Americans, Pacific Islanders, and we still also having the most undecided voters. So we up for grabs, and I would encourage all candidates to reach out to us more to understand what we need, what we want, and in turn, our grassroots organizations will try to help to get the voters to come out to cast their vote on the elections day or even before then. Thank you.
And our last speaker, Teresa Tran.
Great, thanks, Mee. So although, again, I'm Teresa Tran, the Executive Director of APIAVote Michigan, and although representation at the federal level is significant, state-level elections can be even more critical given that the policy implications are often much more immediate. So in the state of Michigan, the Asian American population is fairly small. We only represent about 2.3% of the state's citizen voting age population. But as Mee mentioned before, there are many districts in Michigan where Asian Americans represent greater than 8%. So for instance, in Michigan's 21st House District, a district where Asian Americans make up just over 10% of the citizen voting age population. During the last 2010 midterm election, the incumbent only won by 880 votes, which is equivalent to about 1 in 10 eligible Asian American voters in that district. Similarly, in Michigan's 41st House District, which includes the cities of Troy and Clawson, Asian Americans make up 16% of the citizen voting age population. That's upwards of 11,000 voters. In 2012, that race was won by only 427 votes. So when we're talking about 77% of Asian Americans nationwide reporting they'll vote in this midterm election, that could truly be the difference in our state races. In Michigan, state-level candidates in districts like these are getting wise to our growing Asian American power, and as the fastest-growing racial demographic population in the state, we're growing at a rate of close to 35%. We're seeing that major party candidates are much more likely to attend our candidate forums and are looking for opportunities to engage with our Asian American community. But it's not enough to just show up during election years. As others have mentioned, more can be done in terms of in-language materials, reaching out to ethnic media, and hiring Asian American staff who can really help to gain the trust of disconnected Asian American voters. Our commitment at APIAVote Michigan is to work to mobilize our Asian American community and help them to better connect with candidates to make more informed decisions. In addition to hosting 4 candidate forums, APIAVote Michigan will be sending out 23,000 mailers, close to 60,000 robocalls, 10,000 live phone calls through our phone banking, and knocking on 8,000 doors. Additionally, we're producing in-language voter education materials for those communities with higher limited English proficiency, which includes Bangla, Chinese, Korean, and Vietnamese. So again, that our community can make more informed decisions. So to reiterate what others have said, this is a community that is truly up for grabs, and our candidates and parties need to do more to reach out to us. And I'll send it back to me to close this out.
Thank you, Teresa. So as we open up for questions and answers, I would like to point out that the survey report, including the script used to conduct the survey and an issue brief related to the poll's findings are now available on our website at advancingjustice-aajc.org. Later today, we will also upload a brand new infographic on the polling results. So I encourage you to visit our website to get access to all of these information and documents. We are now open for questions, and I believe Christine, as our technical support guru, is going to be helping to manage that among those who have questions.
Yes, if anybody has any questions, please raise your hand or go ahead and type in your question under the chat area. Any questions? Okay, great. Well, it doesn't seem like anyone has any questions. So once again, Mi, if you'd like to go ahead and close it out.
So on behalf of APIAVote and Advancing Justice AJC, Christine and I want to thank all of you for joining us on the call. We want to appreciate our 3 speakers for contributing their perspective and all that is happening and taking place on the ground to concretize the polling results. I also want to thank our survey and pollster, Dr. Karthik Ramakrishnan, for being on the call to go through the survey results with us. Again, you can go to our website at advancingjustice-aajc.org and get access to all the scripts, polling results, and later on today, the infographics. Thank you all very much.